Good evening all, and welcome. I hope all of you are staying home and are quite healthy still. As a special treat, tonight we are going to be joined by my wife, who is actually launching her very own narration channel in Spanish. So if any of you speak Spanish or want to hear things in Spanish, you can find the link in the description and at the end of the video. But don't worry, her narrations are in English. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I live in Adelaide, South Australia. I moved to the city from a small country town with my partner, Mrs. Brajikarp, roughly 10 years ago now. We moved into a small, 2-story townhouse with another friend. It was a really nice place, clearly an older building, but the interior had been modernized. Everything started off okay. Our friend took the master bedroom, which came with a walk-in wardrobe, while we took the room next door. Both bedrooms and a bathroom were up on the second floor. Under the stairs was a small broom cupboard. We didn't use it much at first because for some reason it was extremely cold in there. Nothing could heat it up, not even a heater. We assumed there must be a hole leading to the outside somewhere and left it at that. It was about a month into living there when the first weird thing happened. I was home alone sitting downstairs with the TV on quietly while I read a book, and I heard my name. I looked at the TV thinking that someone on there must also be named what my name is. But no, nobody on that episode of Scrubs was called that. Out of sheer curiosity, I turned the TV off and listened intently. Nothing. So I figured it must have been my imagination. And then I went to turn the TV back on. As I pressed the power button, I heard my name again. The voice was definitely coming from upstairs. I believed since I was a kid, due to other experiences. But this really got my hairs on end. I called Mrs. B and asked when she would be home. Not until tomorrow. I'm staying at my mum's tonight. Our other housemate was also away. I turned the TV back on, raised the volume and found some blankets in the cold cupboard, and slept downstairs that night. The name calling continued on and off for a few months, but our other housemate never heard it. In fact, she didn't believe in anything paranormal and thought I was making it up. Mrs. B did, and agreed there was something else in that house. Not long after, our housemate moved out, and we took over the master bedroom. A few days later, a handyman came to install a TV antenna plug on the wall downstairs. To get the wires through the wall, he had to get into the crawl space upstairs. It was around lunchtime, and we had an awesome takeaway place just round the corner. I let the guy know I was ducking out for 10 minutes or so to grab food, and left him in the crawl space. When I got back, I found him downstairs confused. "Did you come back 5 minutes ago and call my name?" he asked. No, I said. And he explained that he heard the door open and close, and then his name was called. He chalked it up to my next-door neighbor, but I knew that wasn't it. The real terror began about a week after that. I came home from work at about 8 p.m. when Mrs. B was working late and couldn't be home until midnight. But when I walked into the back door, I distinctly heard her call my name from upstairs. I called back that I didn't think she'd be home yet and made my way up. Opening the bedroom door, I instantly realized that it was not Mrs. B who called me. A wave of hate burst from that room and hit me like a ton of bricks. Never before and never again have I felt a presence like that. Whatever the hell it was, it didn't like me at all. I quickly got changed and took a look around the room. The walk-in wardrobe had a white curtain for a door, and I closed it every morning when I left the house. It was wide open now. I raced back downstairs, left the house, and went to the pub. I met Mrs. B at home when she finished, and told her what happened. She didn't believe me at first, but when she saw how terrified I was of our room, she realized I wasn't lying. The hate in the room was gone, but I could still feel something. We went to bed, and I closed the curtain, and I swear I could feel eyes on me. I slept on the side of the bed furthest away from it, and in the morning the curtain was open. We lived in that house for a few more months, and I never experienced this hate in that same sensation again, until our final day in the house. But there was still something there, something that didn't want me. I put all my clothes in the spare room, so I wouldn't have to go into the walk-in wardrobe, because that's where, whatever it was, felt strongest to me. It was also the location of the crawl space hatch. Friends have heard the voices calling out sometimes, but no one else felt the presence like I did. The day we moved out, I was the last one there. As I was checking over all the rooms and locks for the last time, I heard my name. I shivered but ignored it this time and kept doing what I had to do. I checked the last lock and walked out of the house for the last time. I got into my car, looked up at the master bedroom window, and I swear without a doubt, there was a woman up there glaring at me. That feeling of pure hatred hit me for the last time, and I floored it out of that street and never looked back. Mrs. B to this day doesn't believe me about that because she didn't see it. I can appreciate the need of seeing to believe, but I know what I saw, and I hope I never see it again.
My mother lives in a neighbourhood that isn't exactly a bad part of town, but it's considered on the border. I suffer from insomnia, especially when I'm stressed. I also tend to be able to see more and hear more. I'd like to explain that I have seen paranormal, clairvoyant stuff in my dreams and when I'm at my low points in life. So, when I'm stressed. I was currently in a job transition and participated in a music program that took a lot of time from studies. I was very stressed. It was 1 a.m. during late October, early November. I live in Pennsylvania, so it gets cold. I decided to throw a hoodie on and take a walk around the neighborhood. Preface: a few months ago, my sister and I walked past the house that was abandoned and dead bodies were being pulled out. This was the house where addicts and suicidal people went to die. So I went walking around the block and towards that property. They tore down the house soon after my sister and I had witnessed what happened. And the street light near the house was never turned on in the past 5 years I've lived in this neighborhood with my mum. The moment I step on the curve closest to where the house used to be, the light flickers on. I sprinted home and never slept that night. I did the same thing for 2 more weeks, except I took my dog. When passing, my dog would growl and bark. The light was always turned on. I went a different time each week because of my work schedule, but it was always between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. This ruled out the streetlight being on a timer. It is also not motion censored because cars drive up and down that street all the time without it turning on at night. I no longer walk around at night, especially alone.
I grew up in a haunted house. It was a pretty old house. It still had horsehair insulation, that velvet damask wallpaper, dirt floor basement, crystal doorknobs, cubby holes that you would crawl from one room to another, and a really nice clawfoot tub, along with an awesome wood stove. It was big enough that it had a front and back staircase. The front staircase was really ornate, but the back staircase was basically just plywood. Okay, now that you have a visual, on with my family's experiences. When I was very young, I became more aware of the noises and actions, and my parents would tell me it was all in my head. The older I got, the more I began to doubt that. Starting with the everyday and night experiences, like the footsteps up and down every night, mostly heard on the creaky back staircase. Low knocks on the walls, taps on the windows, items moved or crashed on the floor, and the scariest was gentle scratching noises under my bed and feeling someone sit on my bed. I began wrapping my blankets over my head and blocking my ears with my fingers. Around 10, it became more intense, doors opening and closing with enough force that it was definitely not a draft. The silverware drawer was completely pulled out and smashed to the floor when everyone was in the living room. Feeling not so much a tug on my hair, but like someone was lifting up strands. At this point, my little brother of 6 and me at 10 had been sharing a bedroom. All the rooms were huge. My dad built me my very own room that was previously attic space, but on the same floor. It was huge, and was more like a living room with a bedroom around the corner. Every few days, I would be in bed and hear my door creak open. Someone walk over to my bed and sit down. It was terrifying. I still used to go blankets over my head and fingers in my ears. The knocking on the walls started to become more louder and fast. The scratching under my bed seemed to be a bit more violent. My parents still dismissed our fears. When I was around 11 or 12, it became even more intense. I had to babysit my little brother almost every day during the week. This was back in the day when TVs had knobs to change the channel. We would be in the living room watching TV, and the knobs would visually turn by themselves. Sometimes only a few channels over, and other times fast through a bunch. Like my parents, I downplayed it to my little brother, and just took him outside to play pickle or kick the can with the neighborhood kids. They had already told me the rumors about the house, and would hardly ever come over. The most notable experience was walking down the back stairs. A strand of my hair was tugged hard, and I heard distinct breathing in my ear. I grabbed my brother and went across the street and waited in the pouring rain for my parents to get home. Ironically, where we waited was an entrance to an old cemetery, but I don't believe it was related to the haunting. The older I got, the more aggressive it got. TV knobs still being turned, curtains moving, steps up the stairs turning into stomps. The weirdest to me was the phone cord. It was one of those extremely long cords. The whole family was in the kitchen, and it started spinning. Not like a regular spin, but diagonally, like a lasso, about 5 feet off the wall. My parents downplayed that too, but by then, it didn't matter. I started to become desensitized. Going into 5th grade, I acquired a new best friend. She would come over, and it turns out we were both really into the supernatural. Watcher in the Woods with Betty Davis was our favorite movie. I ended up telling her about the house, and we came up with a brilliant plan to buy one of those Hasbro Ouija boards, candles lit and everything. Never even thinking it would work, and I don't remember if I actually did get it to work, but one day while babysitting I had my innocent little brother play with me. The board immediately worked. My brother was freaking out, but I kept on going. I don't exactly remember the exact questions, but some of the answers were, "Kill John, my little brother." My addiction with all things horror, movies and books and such, led me to believe I had to burn the board. I took it out to the side yard and tried to burn it, but it just scorched a little bit. My father asked why there was a huge pile of burnt leaves and sticks, and I told him why, and he got really serious. He dug the board out of the sticks and leaves and tried to burn it himself on the wood stove. It still just scorched, but more charcoal-like, so he threw it in the trash. After that, things didn't get much worse, but different. I had a huge double closet filled with metal hangers. The sound of them clanking against each other, like a hand sweeping over them, became a new scare. I reverted to my usual finger in ears and blanket over head technique. But then I started getting pissed. I was so sick of being scared. I started yelling at whatever it was to leave us alone whenever it happened, and yelled that I wasn't afraid anymore, telling it to piss off. I had a game most people won't remember called Boggle. It was a cube of letters, and you shook it up and tried to find as many words as possible. One day I sat it in my living room and arranged the letters to say "go away" before bed. I woke up to the words being scrambled to say hump. Gross, I know. Everything ramped up. Louder knocks, heavier sitting on my bed, and more frequent visits into my room. By then I didn't care. I knew it sounds weird, but I started calling it out before I went to bed, and to wake me up at certain times, and it actually did with more gentle knocks by my bed. When something visual happened, I would tell it to cut it out. It didn't really listen that much, but it did occasionally. At the end of that experience, by the time I started fighting back, we moved. A few years later, my parents admitted it was haunted, and described some of their experiences too. I'm still drawn to that house, and I'm dying to walk through it again to see if it remembers me. Weird, I know. I've researched the house and owners and events related to it. The rumor was there was an older woman that died there and had an Irish wake. It was held in the house and lasted a week. I've desperately searched for the previous owners' names but found nothing. One notable thing is that the house has changed hands quite a few times since then. A few months ago I brought it up to my mum, and she told me the previous owners were a woman and her son that was a well-known judge. Their last name was Moriarty. Also, she told me how the day after the house was sold, the woman's daughter ripped the kitchen phone off the wall and screamed at my mother, but now we couldn't use it to make long-distance calls. It didn't take long to find info on the son. He was a really well-known judge. The most messed up thing I learned from his obituary: he took a sabbatical to travel the world to visit sites that people have claimed to have seen the Virgin Mary. Why that is important, out of everything that happened, see the image of the classic depiction of the Virgin Mary in my little brother's bedroom window was the most predominant memory. I wasn't scared but more curious, and then it faded. What are the chances? I'm also agnostic, but for some reason have always felt a deep representation when I need someone to guide me, so I recite Hail Mary. It's been quite therapeutic sharing this. There are many more silly stories about what happened when I was young, but at the present time, I've been seeing moving shadows out of the corner of my eyes every once in a while, as well as orbs. Perhaps one day, I'll be able to revisit my old place and see if the spooks are still about.
A couple of winters ago, I was a bit down on my luck. I had spent the past summer unemployed while my 3-year relationship crumbled around me. It had been toxic for both of us, but we were trapped together by circumstance. It seemed to take forever to finally end, but when it did, I had to find a new living arrangement rather abruptly. And that's how I ended up living in my best friend's dining room for 6 months. Now, these apartments are tiny. The dining area was just a little nook in the corner. My room fit one full-size mattress on the floor almost exactly. The kitchen was maybe 6 paces away. Despite the cramped quarters and being woken up every morning to my friend and his now husband getting ready to leave for work, I finally landed a job on the night shift. We all cohabited really well. My best friend, who we'll call Noel, has experienced a lot of unexplained phenomena since he was a kid. And whatever it is, it seems to follow him from place to place. His husband is a complete non-believer, but that's never bothered Noel. While I wanted to believe him, I had never experienced anything noteworthy until I moved into that dining room. It started very small. As I didn't get home until midnight, I was almost always awake around 2 to 3 a.m, winding down after work, playing games or watching a show before going to bed. Eventually, every few nights, I would start to hear rustling coming from the kitchen pantry, just a few steps away from my bed, like somebody was opening up chip bags and grabbing handfuls. I checked it out thinking it might be some sort of vermin or critter, but there were no signs of any disturbance at all. The apartments were tiny but extremely clean and well built. After this happened a couple of times, I texted Noel, even though I knew he would be asleep at this hour. In the morning, he texted back that he was glad somebody else had finally heard it. A few other noteworthy incidents from that apartment. Noel and I both guitarists, and he would have random guitar picks laying around on every surface. I remember really clearly we were jamming one day, and a guitar pick flew off the kitchen counter toward where we were sitting in the other room. But the strangest and most freaky occurrence happened one day, when Noel and I were having a really impassioned heart-to-heart. Out of my periphery, my glass of water slid in a perfect arc across the table. I jumped out of my skin, literally leaping up from where I sat on the couch. Noel had seen the cup move too, but thought I must have moved it. There's more, but those are the only instances I witnessed personally. We lovingly named whatever it was the pantry ghost. We eventually rented a bigger house, built in the early 1900s, which was, surprisingly, not even slightly haunted.
I was born in 1984 and lived in the same house until the age of 18. My parents had lived there beforehand with my sister, who was 18 months older than me. My mum would always complain to my dad about cold spots in the house and the feeling of being watched. He just used to pass this off as her being alone and spooking herself whilst he was working. My uncle, who was in the army, came to live with them for some time before either my sister and I were born. He was younger and used to go on nights out. My mum and dad used to hear children playing out on the streets regularly in the early hours, which they thought was strange, but couldn't see anyone when they looked out. The occasion that convinced my dad about the house was when one night they were in bed and my uncle was out. They woke up to tapping on their bedroom door. They thought it was my uncle, so said to come in, but he didn't, and the tapping got louder, to the point my dad got out of the bed and with a bat went to the door to open it. To nothing. This was all before my sister and my experiences started, and similar things kept happening. After we were born, they didn't stop. Another family member was sleeping in my sister's room on a pull-out bed. I woke to my sister sitting upright in bed, talking with no one. When she asked who she was talking to, she said the little girl that was sat on the end of the bed. Needless to say, that family member was spooked. I myself had had a few things, like bangs, footsteps, and 2 incidences stick out in my mind. One morning, I was sat at the dining table eating breakfast with my mum, and we heard my sister walk out of her room and start to come down the stairs. We could see the lower stairs from where we were sat, and they had a distinct sound, as stairs do. My mum said, "Here she comes," and we watched the stairs as each step was being walked on, but no one was there. We went upstairs wondering what it was, just to find my sister asleep in bed. This next story is more unbelievable. To this day, I've questioned my mum and sister as to if we actually saw this. My sister was 18. I was 17 at the time. My sister had gotten pregnant young, so we had her baby in the house now too. The baby was asleep in the cot upstairs in my sister's room, and was too young to roll/crawl/climb, like a few weeks old. We were sat at a dining table talking when we all heard and felt a massive bang. We all panicked and sprinted up the stairs and entered the room to find a washing maiden had fallen out into the cot, and my niece was fast asleep in the floor under where the maiden was resting in her cot. We were so puzzled, and none of us knew how that happened. After these events, we told people, and we were one day approached by a local historian who was writing a book and wanted to share our experiences in it. He also found out that our street was on a site of an old orphanage. Needless to say, he wrote the book, and we're in it, along with other ghost sightings in the area. Fast forward a few years, my parents had moved, and I'm living on my own, working in a job, and a new girl starts. Australian. Her family had just moved to the area. We were talking one day, and she started talking about ghosts. She tells me she has 2 dogs that won't come into her bedroom as they whine and act scared, and tells me her house is haunted. I say, "Oh, my house was too," and then she tells me that her house had been written about and was in a ghost book. Turns out she had moved into my old house all the way from Australia, and her room was my old sister's room. I can't tell you how much of that is too perfect for a coincidence. All of this is true and quite creepy.
I was putting my daughter to sleep and felt something looking at me, so I turned around and saw a shadow in the corner. So I walked out of the room to get my husband because I got the chills. But let me backtrack. A few weeks ago, the bed kinda jumped, shook briefly while baby and I were on it. I shrugged it off thinking maybe one of the dogs were under the bed. Then this past week someone knocked on my door 3 times, and when I got to the door, no one was there. I figured it was kids playing because they were out of school at the time. The day after, it happened again, except this time it was 3 very loud bangs which shook my whole apartment. I jumped and flew to the door to catch the person, but no one was there. I was shaking and crying, so I saged the apartment. After that, I thought I was going to be fine. But then I saw that thing again last night, and I'm officially creeped out and done trying to rationalize it. I'm scared. I don't want to be here alone with my baby, but I'm a Psalm, so I don't really have a choice. Any suggestions would be greatly appreciated. I'm going to try another cleanse and sage again.
I'm currently 17 and live in Victoria, Australia. I'm a major believer in the paranormal. Let me explain my predicament. My family and I just moved into a rental house about 2 months ago and have been noticing a shadow out of the corner of our eyes. It started off in only one place where we'd see it pass by one window. This was interesting to me because several of my family members said they'd seen the same thing, and when we decided to finally talk to each other about it, we discovered that we'd seen similar things. At first, we shrugged it off. That was until I had my own personal experience. My older brother and I had been sitting at the dinner table. The table is right next to the kitchen bench for reference, when we saw a shadow of a head out of the corner of our eyes poke up, so it was just sticking over the bench. But of course, when we'd look over there, there'd be nothing. Now, we have 2 dogs that are in the house, and at first we thought it was one of them. That was until we realized one was in the room with my sisters, and the other was asleep at our feet. That freaked us out a little, but whatever. It wasn't giving off a bad vibe, so we continued with whatever we were doing. Before we decided to head off to bed, we actually saw it a few more times. My personal experience comes after, when we finally decided to go to bed, probably around midnight. I'd gone to the bathroom after putting the other dog in my room, as one dog is with my sisters and one is with me. Now, where the sink is situated in the bathroom is at the opposite end to the door, so you'd have your back to the door when you wash your hands. I'd finished washing my hands and turned around to locate a towel or something to dry them with, when I saw a shadowy figure walk past the doorframe. Me, being in a kind of curious daze, while keeping my head straight, walked very slowly to the doorframe which leads to a small doorway, and once I'd reached the opening, I could see out of the corner of my eye. It was so close that, if I'd have slightly lifted my hands, I would have touched it. But of course, once I looked directly at it, it's gone. After the encounter, I hadn't seen it in almost 2 weeks. I'm not sure if it's bad or not, but does anyone know what this could be? Because I'm a bit freaked out.
My family and I live in the same rented house for the past 10 years. We had no hauntings for the first 2 years, then 3 of us had experienced sleep paralysis within the same year. I had experienced it 3 times. The first time, I saw an imp holding my hand and went straight under my bed, pulling my arm down. I woke up and saw some scratch marks. The second and third time, it's the same story of shadow people, red eyes and all dark sitting on my chest. I was friends with the neighbours and they told me they had the same sleep paralysis dreams. One of them has a third eye and he's well aware that their house is haunted by a lady and a dark figure. The lady can be seen going up and down the stairs and sometimes stay in their bedroom. I wonder if the dark figure they saw is the same one from my sleep paralysis experience. My friend told me that the dark figure is no longer in our neighbourhood, but the ghost lady is still staying in their house, but had done nothing to harm them. Hauntings stopped for a few years. At the 8th year, there were strange occurrences at our current house, but whoever it is, it's harmless. TV and electronic toys randomly turning on. Some things getting misplaced somehow but never lost. Grandma felt that her leg was being lifted up, but then suddenly whatever lifting her leg up lets go while she's sleeping. This happened for just a few months. Then it just stopped. There's also a haunted school near us. It's only 6 houses away. I used to work in a building right next to it. This is the time before I started experiencing sleep paralysis. My colleagues sometimes hear crying of children during the night shift. I brushed it off and went through my work and just called it bullshit. After a few months working in there, the same stories are being told during break times from different colleagues working at the night shift. Our schedules are being shuffled monthly, so there's always a different group working different hours, and those working the night shift tells the same crying children's story. I started to question my belief in ghosts, but I never heard of actual crying. One night, where everyone was out for the holiday, I volunteered to work for the night, alone. It was quiet, all alone except for a couple of IT personnel and security guards from another floor. Then it happened. I heard an office chair moved and keyboard started typing for a good 10 seconds. It stopped. Then the office chair made a noise again as if someone just stood up from it. I ran out and clocked out early because it was my first time experiencing something paranormal. HR told me that they understand and it was a normal occurrence in the building. I didn't get a warning or a memo from it. There are more ghost stories from the same neighbourhood, but I'm not about to tell them all as I'm here to ask advice. I only shared a few so you'd have some idea of how haunted the neighbourhood is. We're at the 10th and final year living in our current house and we're about to move to a new one. How can I make sure ghosts of my haunted neighbourhood don't follow us? And what can I do to make sure the house we're moving into isn't haunted? If it is haunted, what should I do?
I'm nearly 30 now, and still remember this experience like it were yesterday. I was curious to know if it's happened to anyone else in their lifetime. I was around 7 years old. We had a huge 2-story house where most of the living rooms and such were upstairs. The garage and laundry were downstairs. The stairs themselves were quite tall. 2 flights of stairs went to the top, made some form of wood, and my bedroom was the first room on the right at the top of these stairs. I was sound asleep one night, when all of a sudden I was dreaming of someone being in the laundry. Immediately following that, in my sleep, I heard this extremely loud thumping sound. Someone was running up the stairs, and it was in a hurry. I awoke and I could hear it still. It was running, and then it stopped. A moment later I heard breathing outside my doorway. My door was open, as I usually like sleeping with the door open and hallway light on. I was pretty much frozen and petrified at this point. Usually, in bad dreams as a wee kid, you would call out for your parents. I was too frozen and too scared to do anything, let alone call out. I laid down and faced the wall, not wanting to move, and I could still hear that breathing. I had a gut feeling something was just sitting outside the doorway. I woke up next morning and noticed one of my figurine toys had been moved around. That was the last thing I remembered from that experience. I then started having awful reoccurring dreams in every house we moved to. These dreams lasted probably a good 5 to 7 years, and I would wake up in my dreams with my door open. I would look down the hallway from my bed and see someone sitting at the dining table. In my dream, I would do the same thing, just lay back down and pretend to be asleep. However, in the dream, this figure would always get up, walk into my room, and put its hands over my face. I would always go through a motion where I would try to force myself to wake up, rolling my eyes around and the like, even trying to twitch my body or yell. This strange figure, which I could never see since my eyes were closed in the dream, would try to suffocate me with its hands over my whole face to prevent me from waking up. Has anyone ever experienced anything like this?
I'm not sure if these are paranormal activities, but they sure did creep me and my family out. So I have lived in a pretty small house for 9 years, and these are the most weird ones. Let me tell you first a bit about my house. When you enter my house, there is a living room, and when you go to the right, there are the stairs to the second floor, and next to the stairs is my sister's room. To the left of the stairs is the kitchen. You can get to the kitchen from the living room, and there is a wall in the middle. I don't know what it is called because I live in Finland. And when you go to the upstairs, to the right is my room, and to the left is some other room. My room is directly on top of the kitchen, and the other room is directly on top of my sister's room. My first experience was about 4 years ago, upstairs in my room. It started with me just about going to sleep, and I see my toy dog just looking at me in a creepy way. I was bothered and I turned it to look the opposite way, and in the morning, it was looking at me again. I know that no one visited my room at that time. The rest have been the most recent and have all actually happened between a year. This too happened in my room upstairs, but I did not witness it. So it went like this, according to my sister who experienced this. She was just chilling with her friend and decides to take a photo on Snapchat. And to her surprise, there is this black thing with 2 white dots under the bed. And she just freaks out and tells her friend about it and shows the picture. It could have just been a plastic bottle, but under my bed was completely empty. These next 2 happened in my sister's room downstairs in the middle of the night, about 2 months ago. My sister was in her room with her friend again, the same friend, and they just hear some footsteps from outside with high heels walking around the middle wall thing. Then the steps got more louder and faster and reached my sister's door. Then the steps stop and she hears whispering from the top corner of the room, and it was very unclear, so she didn't understand anything. Then about 3 weeks later, this weird noise appears, and then she heard some nagging in front of her. Hi everyone, thank you so much for watching this video. It's been a while since I've done a collaboration with Mort, as you may have noticed. If not, it's Mrs. Mort here. I've done a collaboration with Mort today because I will be starting a new channel called Nocturna, where I will be narrating horror stories in Spanish. So if anybody would like to tune into that, listening to horror stories in Spanish, or if you have any friends or family who would like to listen to horror stories in Spanish, there will be some content coming up soon. The channel is called Nocturna. So I hope you've enjoyed today's video, and we'll see you in the next one.